The conference has been organized by the Kuldīga Regional Council, Kuldīga Museum, the ministries and the Cultural Institute in Germany. Therefore, the introductory speeches will be presented by the following speakers. And the first to speak will be the chair of Kuldīga Regional Council, Ms. Inga Bērziņa. Welcome. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the conference. I'm very happy to see so many people being present despite of the extraordinary situation and emergency both in Latvia and worldwide related to the COVID-19 pandemics. And despite that, we have really managed to convene personally, and I would like to welcome those who are participating in our conference remotely and express a hope that the next time those individuals who are not being able to be present here and to join us would join us in the future, because although the remote and distant communication and technologies are quite well arranged, but the effects of presence cannot be replaced by anything else. Today's International Scientific Conference at the time of Duchy of Courland and Semigallia, a unique period in world history. I consider the conference to be the last section of our way towards inclusion of Kuldīga, old town in Venta, ancient valley, to be included on the list of the Cultural World Heritage. The nature protected territories alongside with the Venta waterfall, which is the widest waterfall in Europe, will constitute the part and constituent of the World Cultural Heritage. Currently, we have reached the stage when a nomination application has been drafted, and in February 2021, we plan to submit it and file it for inclusion into the list of World Cultural Heritage. Today's conference, I truly hope, as we have planned and expected, the conference today, what the researchers, historians and scientists dealing and studying the history of Kuldīga and the Duchy of Courland, the deliverables and outputs of your work will be used in the application for World Cultural Heritage, and that will be the final cherry on our contribution and way towards that. I would like to wish you a very active conference and discussion, and I wish that people being present here today at the conference would have the time, leisure time, for getting acquainted and familiarized with old town of Kuldīga, with Kuldīga in general and our heritage. Thank you so much for your elevating speech, and now the floor would be passed to the director of Kuldīga Regional Museum, Mr. Eduards Dambergs. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, to those present in the audience and the remotely present participants. The Kuldīga Regional Museum and the Kuldīga Regional Council were delighted and honored to organize and convene the International Scientific Conference for researchers coming from 5 countries in order to discuss the time of Duchy of Courland and Semigallia in a very wide scope and perspective. This is one of the significant and key and crucial conferences being organized by Kuldīga Regional Council for the last decades on our way towards the inclusion into the list of Cultural World Heritage of UNESCO. We have been working very targetfully for the heritage of Kuldīga be recognized worldwide, and Kuldīga is included in the national list of Latvia of the UNESCO World Cultural Heritage, and that conference is the next step for our work to be continued. Of course, the history of Kuldīga is intertwined with the history of the Duchy of Courland. Of course, the town of Kuldīga has changed all over the time and has turned into the diverse and very multifunctional town it is now. And the knowledge base gained during the research and studies will be useful for the next generations. So, apart from using the old streets and buildings of our old town of Kuldīga, we must pursue for the future and build the knowledge base and store as well as preserve our cultural and historical heritage to be maintained and enhanced. And that work is closely related to sustainability and development and growth of the town itself. To conclude, I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizers and people participating for the conference to be organized. The chair of Kuldīga Regional Council, Ms. Inga Bērziņa, as well as the University of Latvia, the Institute in Germany, the Kuldīga Regional Museum, and the head of Regional Museum of Kuldīga, Ms. Inna Rosenthal, for her great contribution for the conference to really be convened and organized, as well as the conference would really take place. Those who are watching us online, I would like to wish to meet you in person next time in our beautiful Kuldīga. Thank you so much. I would like to thank my colleague Mr. Eduards Dambergs, and the next speaker would be Professor Valda Kļava, but taking into consideration that COVID-19 restrictions have changed her plans at the university, I am delighted and honored to read her speech. Dean of the Faculty of History and Philosophy from University of Latvia, Dr. Historical Valda Kļava, dear organizers, participants and watchers of the conference, ladies and gentlemen, every period in the history is entitled to be named unique. Every historical region is unique and very special, as the developments and events taking place in each period and in each region are of a historical peculiarity for that, and that principle is respected in the historiography. Although we are reviewing the course of historical developments and flow of such historical events, there are different times and periods as well as regions standing out and outlining with a very characteristic peculiarity be demonstrated and manifested much more brightly. And those early periods in the history of Europe from 16th to 18th century, when the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia was established and existed, is a really very brightful period, full of various very fluctuating and windy and stormy developments and very far-sighted changes. That period is characteristic and characterized by transition from personal to rent rights to civic, from corporate to individual lifestyle, from universal power to Christian republics into nation states and a relation of our town with the existence of such a governance and power. This is the background where the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia existed as the fruit of competition among the superpowers of the Baltic Sea, which was very attractive and pleasing object for conquer. Still, it was able and capable of fluctuating and standing out in the political storms, despite the danger to be extincted or conquered, or perhaps thanks to the fact that it could be really a bright and very full-fledged page in the history of Latvia and the region. Of course, the history of the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia is understood and is perceived only in the context of the entire history of the Baltic Sea region and entire Europe. Of course, there are so many phenomena and developments and events in the history of the Duchy, despite the huge contribution and investment of scientists and researchers during the last 50 years, and especially from the beginning of the 90s of the previous century, in the result of the cooperation among Latvian, German and Polish historians. I'm really delighted for the historians from the University of Latvia. And I would like to thank the organizers of the conference, and I would like to wish of the very acute debate and discussions and new discoveries. And our foreign speakers will participate in our conference online, and that means that we will see their data flow from the screen. Therefore, Professor Brita Rudolph's speech will be provided on the screen. Welcome. Dr. Brita Rudolph, Executive Director, Institute of Heritage Management.
Glad to have the opportunity to address you briefly this morning through these technical means of a video address, unfortunately, while I'm also online watching you and probably right now my own video address at this very important conference as a result of the COVID-19 policies, which would have required me to observe a 2-week quarantine if I wanted to be with you today. And I'm even the more glad that we have these technical opportunities right now, which still allow us to participate at a distance, watch your proceedings, and even have this little So I'm so glad you're all together to reflect on the Duchy of Courland, the important influences it had in the history of Kuldīga. And while I would really prefer to be with you in Kuldīga right now, to walk and ponder through the beautiful city center and its historic architecture, I am sure that your being together will give us new impetus, new lights, and even new and important ideas on this specific period of history for the city. Now, perhaps it's also a little my fault that we're looking these days at the Duchy, at the Courland history, when coming together at Kuldīga, because it's partly my fault that this topic has been emphasized so strongly in the World Heritage bid that Kuldīga is undertaking and desiring for quite some time. And I've since been very often asked, why do you think that Courland would be the period that might be best used when arguing for a World Heritage title or for a World Heritage recognition of Kuldīga? Well, there's a couple of reasons. I think one of these reasons is that if you look at the history of Kuldīga, which you will be doing these days, you find out that it started very early, perhaps in prehistoric times, but we know very little. And then we have the medieval history of a smaller local center, perhaps a larger village. But what made Kuldīga really flourish, really become a regional center, is the history of the Duchy of Courland. It's during the Duchy that it expanded, that became a regional center of craft and trade, that it became a residency of the ruler even, and hence gained regional influence. In fact, influence well beyond the boundaries of the Duchy at the time. And it's also, funnily enough, one of the longest periods that influenced the history of Kuldīga. With even more than 2 centuries, this is a history that shaped the city much longer than the Russian influence or the influence of the Latvian Republic. And as such, it is really something that still determines to some extent the spirit of Kuldīga today. Not only because there are many historic houses that still remind you of the time, but also the urban plan in its entirety, the landscaping, the design of the city, the panoramas from various directions really, I feel, give us a reminder of its existence in the 17th and 18th century, which had so much influence on how Kuldīga formed. And so when we were discussing all the different opportunities for World Heritage, it seemed an almost obvious choice that this story, this part of history, had to feature very prominently because it was so important. But only while we were researching and over time, we found out that what made it even more important is that all the other historic centers of the Duchy of Courland had largely been destroyed in various wars and for various reasons, and that there were very few cities and settlements left that had the ability to represent the Duchy's time and architecture and urban planning features at all. And when comparing these very few, it really turned out that Kuldīga had sustained quite a lot of the architecture, the urban shape, the proportions of the city. And when I first, more than a year ago, saw some initial marking of an attribute mapping indicating the historic houses, I superimposed on the contemporary map, and there have been many updated maps ever since. I was initially concerned because it seemed so little in the historic urban fabric, but then when superimposed on a historic map dated by the end of the Duchy's period, it suddenly seemed quite substantial. And nowadays we even have a map which represents also the streetscape, the water bodies, and the greenery that remained ever since. And it has now become quite clear, to me at least, that Kuldīga can still give the best possible visual impression of what a city looked like at the time of the Duchy of Courland. And I believe the Duchy of Courland had an influence that was quite substantial for the history of Europe at large, but also for global history, due to its enormous impact on also a global scale, with colonial activities, with trade far beyond European borders. And as such, I believe that the Duchy of Courland should be represented through a historical testimony on the UNESCO World Heritage List, and that the best possible historical testimony to do that is the Historic Center of Kuldīga. And I hope that you, being together for the next 2 days, will give us a lot of detail and knowledge and better understanding of how the importance of this time can be communicated, and how Kuldīga can still represent this importance and the various facets of the Duchy in contemporary times. So I will be curiously following all your presentations, and you might see my name again or hear my name again in a number of questions that will be asked over the following 2 days. So I really hope that this exchange will be valuable even at a distance, and I am truly excited to be part of this experience. Thank you very much.
Paldies, Britai.
Thanks to Brita Rudolfa, we will do everything to have very interesting discussions and to provide possibility to organize this here in the hall and also remotely. Therefore, before we start listening to the lecturers, just a small technical information. As you all see, due to restrictions related with COVID, conference was not only moved from April to September, but it is also technically more complicated. So to feel nice and easy here, so some technicalities. So on the screen you see everything what we see, also what our audience sees on the other side of the screen. So about questions, so here participants of the conference are invited to ask questions by using the mic in the middle of the hall. So the mic is needed for us to be able to provide interpreting. So for all speakers have to use the mics. Remotely, we invite you to ask your questions by sending them to the email kml@gmail.com or using Facebook account of Kuldīga Museum. So knm@gmail.com, and mentioning whom you address the question and what is your name. So please send these questions during the presentation. Then the questions will be sent to me, and we will ask these questions to the lecturers, and so they will be able to answer. So the time for speeches is 20 or 25 minutes, and we will monitor this timing, and we really ask you to obey this time, and then 5-10 minutes will be left for questions and answers session. If we do not manage to answer the question, we will try to provide the answer later during discussion. So now I just invite everybody who is present here, and also our audience remotely, just be patient if we have some technical issues. Just we do hope that we will not have any, but anyway, just I wish you fruitful day, very interesting conference, new ideas, and I will give floor. So I will invite our first head of the first panel, first session chair will be Marīta Jakovļeva, representing University of Latvia History Institute, and she also represents the Latvian Archive of History. So Marīta, the floor is yours. Hello. I'm really honored and I'm happy to be here today and participate in such an event. So it is really my honor to be here. It is a great event in Latvian scientific field. It is not devoted to 20th century, but such very interesting time as history of Duchy of Courland. Unfortunately, the number of researchers of that period is quite small, and so we are really happy that the history of the small Duchy of Courland is still popular in Europe, and as we see from participants of today's conference, it is scientists from Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, and Netherlands, and I do hope that we will have even more interest in this period of time, and also those who are interested in the history of that part will become more, and people will take more and more activities to find out something new. I do hope that we are successful today. So when coming here, we were very happy to see rainbows, and so we thought that this is a greetings from the Dukes, and I really apologize if we have some technical issues. And I haven't participated in such events when we have online broadcasting and when we have questions coming in from online and comments, but I do hope that we cope with everything. And now I'm honored to give the floor to the first speaker, a Polish colleague who is the librarian from Voivodeship Public Library, Copernicus Library in Torun, and he will speak about fights for Jelgava in the years 1621-1622, so the time of Polish-Swedish War. And a very interesting topic, and Mariusz is going to tell us about it here today, and he has his thesis on this topic, and also he has a book on this topic in Polish, and it would be nice to translate this into Latvian. That would be very interesting for all of us. But now we give floor to Mariusz Balcerek. The floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Mariusz Balcerek. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. Do you see my presentation? Whoa. And now it's okay. Oh, thank you. And the speech aims to present the battles for Jelgava in the years 1621-1622. This period was essential but also a tragic time in the history of the state. For the first time, the war entered the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia. We want to answer several questions. Why did Jelgava capitulate so easily? Why did the Lithuanian commander Christopher Radziwiłł care so much about the reconquering Jelgava? Was there a chance to defeat Swedish King Gustavus Adolphus in summer of 1622? The research will be conducted using manuscripts kept in archives and libraries in Latvia, Poland, and Sweden. These are mainly war diaries and correspondence. Some of these materials were published. We also have many publications. The first researcher on the battles in Jelgava was Polish historian Konstanty Górski, who published the results of his work in the late 19th century. Before World War II, the Swedish General Staff posted a multi-volume book on the wars of Gustavus Adolphus. Later, for several dozen years, we note stagnation in this subject. It is only in the last 30 years that we note the more significant interest of this fight capital of Jelgava. The Polish researchers Henryk Wisner, Radosław Sikora, Karol Łopatecki, Michał Paradowski, and Mariusz Balcerek had published their works when they present no conclusions based on known and discovered sources. In 1621, the eyes of people in Europe were directed at Kotin. In Moldova, Poles, Lithuanians and Cossacks faced the army of the Turkey there. Almost 200,000 people fought for the control of the entire region. After a few weeks of struggle, a ceasefire was signed, followed by peace. Their borders have not changed. The involvement of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in conflict with Turks was used by Swedish King Gustavus Adolphus. The Swedes did not agree to extend the truce on Daugava, on the Daugava River and attacked Riga in the summer of 1621. Deprived of support from Poles and Lithuanians, who fought with Turks and Tatars, the city defended itself relatively long. On September 26th, Riga opened its gates to Gustavus. The Swedish king wanted to secure his rule in Riga. The threat could have come from the south, so he turned his attention there. In this way, Jelgava became the target of the Swedish attack. The army of Gustavus departed from Riga on October 6th. It numbered about 8,000 soldiers and 8 heavy guns. The road led along the Lupa River. Artillery and heavy equipment were transported by water. On October 12th, the Swedish army arrived in Jelgava. The city did not have any fortifications, leaving it defenseless against any attack. Only the castle could resist. The building was built on a Lupa River island between the Mai stream and the branch called Drixa, or the lake. It was a 13th century conventual castle on the 35 on 30 meters square plan. In early modern times, the prince's seat was surrounded by a ground rampart, and there were circular bastions on the horns. Unlike what we see on the Tobiasz Kraus set, the fortifications were regular. In the documentation of Jelgava's capitulation, we can read the words Ruden and Val. This must refer to ground fortifications with the circular bastions. In 1622, there were fortifications in the quadrangular plan with 4 regular bastions. Currently available materials indicate that the Swedes have more modernized them. We can see thus constructions on the maps of Riga from 1621 and of Bauska from 1625. We can see here the imposition of 2 plans made in the GIMP program. We can see here a plan of the Jelgava's castle with the circular bastion fortifications. The garrison commanded by Gotthard Schröder had several dozen soldiers. Gunpowder and food supplies were low. Despite these problems, a short defense of the castle could be assumed. However, the case of symbolic and lasted 3 hours. The Swedes captured the castle without a fight, so easy mastery of the capital of the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia did not lie in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Lithuanian commander Christopher Radziwiłł promised to help Jelgava. He arrived the day after. Lithuanians had about 1,500 soldiers. Despite of a disproportion of strength, Christopher Radziwiłł wanted to force Gustavus to battle in the open field. Earlier, Polish-Lithuanian troops, who were greatly outnumbered but of better quality, beat the Swedes in the fight. The Lithuanian commander was counting on this very much. The quick surrender of the castle in Jelgava showed the Duke Frederick is a bad light. The prince feared the reaction of the Polish king Sigismund and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. That is why he organized an investigation into the surrender of the castle in Jelgava. Thanks to him, we got to know many details about the fortifications, stocks, crew, and circumstances surrender. For example, the condition of the fortifications was better in 1617 during the last conflict. As a result of the investigation, the guild for compromising the surrender of the castle in Jelgava was found only in Commandant Gotthard Schroeder. In our view, Duke Frederick has a greater responsibility for it. The Lord recruited too few soldiers and did not pay them. The suspicious capitulation was part of the prince's policy of neutrality, which was not accepted by the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Radziwiłł believed that the Duke betrayed the sovereign, but he did not dare to accuse him openly. The quick surrender of Jelgava forced Radziwiłł to change his plans. To defend Lithuania, he had to replace Gustavus' path. The Swedish king had to take over the Courlandish castle in Bauska on the way, but the Lithuanian commander was not afraid of the attitude of his defenders. Both opponents met in place between Jelgava and Bauska. The Swedish king, despite his numerical superiority, did not decide to battle. Radziwiłł saved Lithuania and Bauska. Near the village Emburga on the Liupa River, Radziwiłł learned the new tactics of Gustavus. It involved the use of field fortifications and evasion from the battle. Radosław Sikora, a Polish historian, was the first who noticed and described it. The caution of the Swedish king resulted from the respect he had for the Lithuanian army. Gustavus and his commanders remembered what happened under Koknese and Salaspils. Winter stopped the war and both armies left for their lairs. In the new year, the Lithuanians moved faster than Swedes to fight. In January 1622, Radziwiłł blocked the castle in Jelgava. At the time, the castle crew was composed of almost 500 people. The commandant of the castle was Anders Eriksson Hestehuvud. The Lithuanian commander had at his disposal over 2,000 soldiers. Radziwiłł could not gather all his strength in one place. Lack of more infantry and adequate artillery did not allow Radziwiłł to conduct a regular siege. Frederick could not count on the real support of Radziwiłł. The only thing left for the Lithuanian commander was the tedious blockade and the hope that the defenders would surrender themselves. The ambitious Lithuanian did not give up and prepared another attack at the beginning of July. For this purpose, he ordered the construction of a unique floating war machine. The decimated garrison was frightened by the sight of the assault craft and agreed to talk. On July 5th, the garrison surrendered. At the time, there were only about 100 soldiers left in the castle. In the 6-month siege of Jelgava was an outstanding success for Radziwiłł. He managed to gather and maintain most of the army under the besieged capital of the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia, and it was not easy to respect of unpaid soldiers. The Lithuanian commanders secured Lithuania and forced Gustavus to act. Swedish preparation to help Jelgava took a long time. As a result, the Swedish army appeared in place a week after the surrender of the castle. Gustavus brought with him an army of 7,000 soldiers and 20 guns. Radziwiłł could have had around 2,000 soldiers around Jelgava, most cavalry. Comparing the size of both armies, this gives us a ratio of 3.5 to 1 in favor of the Swedes. However, the Lithuanian commander was not afraid of confronting with opponent. Radziwiłł was counting on his cavalry, which was better than the Swedish one. Gustavus was aware of his superiority. That is why he tried to use tactics tested in autumn 1621. The Lithuanians prepared for it. Radziwiłł built north of the castle fortifications field. He also ordered that the area be leveled for cavalry. Based on this, he wanted to conduct offensive and defensive actions. That's how Radziwiłł wanted to beat Gustavus. The Swedish king was surprised by the Lithuanian preparations. The Lithuanian commander had big problems with the implementation of his plans at Jelgava. He did not have enough infantry and artillery to expand the field fortifications. Moreover, Radziwiłł's soldiers were not paid and were quarreling. The Lithuanian troops were dissatisfied with the fact that the foreigner units of cavalry from Livonia, the Duchy of Courland, and Pilsen were being offered higher rates. The Polish Hussars, heavy cavalry, which considered itself the best, could not accept this fact. Radziwiłł barely managed to ease the conflict temporarily. Let us look at the Lithuanian fortification around Jelgava. We can do this thanks to preserved sources, reports from fights, lists, and first of all, maps. The maps from early modern and modern times that show topographies and rivers are needed here. Gustavus moved along the Liupa River, which transported heavy equipment. This is why Radziwiłł tried to strengthen this direction. In the first half of the 7th century, the Sveta River had to flow into the Liupa River elsewhere, perhaps more the south. The maps show the Liupa River bend west. It is possible that presented in this way the old riverbed Liupa, which is currently used by the Sveta River. In written sources about the battle for Jelgava in the summer of 1622, we found information about the location of a fort on Sveta River that is 4.5 kilometers from the Lithuanian camp near Jelgava. This is my reconstruction of the area around Jelgava. A small fort was erected in the place where the Sveta River flows into the Liupa River. The works on this structure began in March. It was called Fort Butler after the name of the Irish infantry commander. Opposite Fort Butler, on the west bank of River Liupa, was another fort. Between the two fortifications, Radziwiłł's soldiers stretched chain to the Swedes who could not swim in this part of the river. At the northern end of the island castle, another fort was erected, named after Steczkowski, the commander of the Lithuanian cavalry. These fortifications defended access to Dryksa. On hill west of the Castle Island, another fort was built and named after Kopachewski, the commander of the Lithuanian cavalry. South of this fort, Radziwiłł ordered to bring a few smaller fortifications. To the north of the city and the camp, Lithuanians erected a rampart. A similar one was built on the island right in front of the castle. On July 16th, the Swedes launched an attack on Lithuanian fortifications. They took Fort Butler and even the fort on the western bank of the Liupa River. Because of this triumph, Gustavus moved his camp to the other side of the Sveta River. It was situated between the Liupa River and the forest. Radziwiłł did not respond to this attack. Both sides only concluded a brief truce. On July 25th, 5. After the ceasefire, the Swedes attacked Fort Steczkowski. After this occupation, they hid deeper into the island. There, the Lithuanians had secretly erected the new fort area. The Swedish attack broke on it. The Lithuanian fortifications can be seen on the Tobias Kraus plan from 1652. The Swedes strengthened the fortifications on the island and moved part of the camp there. They could do this because another truce had been concluded. When reinforcements arrived from Finland, Gustavus broke the contract. On August 1st, the Swedish army, with around 100-700 soldiers, attacked the Lithuanian fortifications on the west bank of the Liupa River. Radziwiłł sent 400 against them. Despite of 4:1 power ratio, the Lithuanians won. Success could have been higher, but one unit of the Hussars refused to carry out the order. Attack was carried out by a group of foreign cavalry. 2 days later, there was another clash. The Swedes built a fort over Drixa, and the Lithuanians tried to interrupt them. Both commanders had considerable forces in the field. Radziwiłł was counting on the battle. Against the Hussars refused to obey the order and did not attack the enemy. The commander did not suffer any consequences for insubordination. It was probably related to a payment in arrears. However, on the August 3rd, the same day, a fight broke out. Radziwiłł ordered the building of a new fort. The Swedes were threatened and attacked it quickly. The balance of power was negative for the Lithuanians, but their commander was not discouraged. At the crucial moment of the battle, the Lithuanians cavalry again refused to attack due to adverse field conditions. At Radziwiłł's orders, 2 units of the Hussars, probably the best in all their army, charged the enemy. According to the Lithuanians, the attack was successful, which the Swedish side did not want to admit. However, the attack by 2 units could not resolve the fight. The Lithuanians had to leave the fort they were building. Radziwiłł could not come to terms with this defeat. His plan of forcing his opponent to fight in the field and crushing him failed that day. On the other hand, Gustavus won a Pyrrhic victory. He captured the Lithuanian fort but suffered heavy losses, probably about 500 soldiers. The Swedish king had to ask himself whether winning Jelgava was worth and further losses, and the answer was no. As a result, talks were held for some time and ended with the signing of a truce. The treaty was signed on August 10th. Both armies agreed to maintain the status quo until May 1st, 1623. The Duchy of Courland and Semigallia with Jelgava remained in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This should be considered to be one of Radziwiłł's success. The Polish king Sigismund was very unhappy about the truce. According to that ruler, the treaty was concluded without his consent. To punish Radziwiłł, the king did not promote him. Within 3 years, the highest Lithuanian commander was Leo Sapieha, who was a faithful executor of orders but devoid of military talent. Conclusions. In 1621-1622, the war entered the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia for the first time. The main battles were fought around and for Jelgava. We present their course above. An analysis of the events allows us to answer the question that we asked in the introduction. The responsibility was borne by Frederick, the Duke of Courland, who did not care about his castle. The Lithuanian commander Christopher Radziwiłł fought for the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia because by doing so he defended Lithuania. The Lithuanian commander wanted to force the Swedish king Gustavus Adolphus to battle in the open field. In summer of 1622, Christopher Radziwiłł managed to force King Gustavus to take the field. During them, the future Lion of the North was close enough to suffer his first defeat. Thank you for attention.
Paldies.
Thank you to the speaker. Do we have any questions, comments, or remarks? Do we have any questions in the audience? Please be so kind to ask in the mic. I have rather a question or comment regarding the responsibility of the Duke Frederick of Courland. First of all, of course, the Duke, as the subordinate to the Polish king, was responsible for the defense of his duchy, but taking into consideration that it was not a war for Courland people and Courland duchy, and was the clash or war between two superpowers and about the concerning the crown of Sweden. And Gustav Adolf, who had the duchy, had great losses in fighting and combating the royals for the existence of the duchy as such, when in 1615 the opponents, brothers Noldens, were killed, and there was a trial for that murder. We know all that page in the history of duchy. These were huge financial loss, as well as the efforts put into the resolution of the dispute, and the castle being given to Swedes. Mariusz Balcereks also presented these pages of the history, so the story was not so simple, and we could, of course, reprimand a lot to the Duke Frederick, but he was already more than 50 years old and did not participate in the battles himself. And we can remember the Battle of Salaspils, which was really a point for Lithuanians to win over superior in number Swedes, and the unit was led by him and entered the battlefield, and really was at the crucial point for changing a victory. Would you be so kind, Mariusz, to explain that Duke Frederick of Courland is to blame for being very negligent? So the question is to Mariusz, could you comment more why the Duke Frederick could be blamed for being negligent?
Tekstu jau viņam var vienīgi paši jautājumi.
Tiek nodublēts jautājums, jā, tagad man saka, viņi...
So we will have quite technical, prolonged communication with speakers remotely via Zoom conference, and it takes a while to repeat question and to answer. Some technical issues while we be communicating the question to Mariusz.
Okay, so from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth view, the Duke Frederick was responsible for defend their capital, so they had to fight for Jelgava. Sorry, I am Polish, so I have to have a Polish view in this discussion. I could understand the view from the Duke Frederick. In my opinion, Christopher Radziwiłł had the right to accuse the Frederick, and that's all.
Actually speaking, we could be discussing quite a lot, and I think that it is not a moment to do so. And if there are no other questions to the speaker, most probably we will extend our gratitude to our first speaker in our session, and we will continue with the next speaker and presentation. And the next speaker is the researcher from the National Library of Latvia, Miss Anna Juta Zālīte, who will present the Duchy of Courland and Kuldīga in the old maps from 16th to 18th century. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It seems that we have really a very summer-like and autumn day in one, as all the way was really blessed with a lot of rainbows. And I would like to tell about the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia and Kuldīga in old maps. So nowadays, old maps are mainly viewed as more artworks with ornamental lines, letters and pictures depicting on ancient scenery that has vanished with the time. And sometimes people are collectioning those, are using as the decorative elements to really decorate their interiors, or are purchasing them to invest in the accrued funds. Although the old maps may serve as a significant source of information for researching various historical processes, as well as ancient sceneries which have vanished with the time. The old maps can provide significant information and detailed information on the research and study of historical processes. We can find information on sometimes existed and vanished scenery, and we can follow the geographical knowledge of historical period and historical understanding and development in a particular area or territory. At the beginning of my presentation, I would like to emphasize and notice that this is not a comprehensive research on the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia and Kuldīga in old maps, because currently my research has been directed in a slightly different focus. And I would like to provide the cartographic materials being printed, where we can find information on the Duchy of Courland, which have been identified and are available in the map storages and depositories of Latvian memory institutions. Geographical location of Latvia and the course of historical development demonstrate and evidence the fact that the ancient Nordic countries, German, Poland, Prusland, Lithuania and Russian maps include the geographical location of Latvia. But currently I would like to speak about the maps where to the Duchy of Courland, Kurzeme, or modern time Latvia could be referred to. The discovery or geographical discovery of Courland as a territory is intertwined with the geographical discovery of the lands of north of Europe, Baltic Sea and modern time Latvia. The research into the history of mapping of Latvia have been provided by many different researchers, and results of their research are compiled in separate publications as well as articles published in periodicals, and the most significant of them have been Mr. Leonīds Arbūzovs, Mr. Arnolds Speke, Mr. Otto Bongs, Mr. Edgars Dunsdorf, Mr. Jānis Straukmanis and other researchers. Data on Courland and geographical discovery of Courland as a territory or an area, including the geographical discovery of the Duchy of Courland, can be found in the book of Arnold Speke, The Ancient Amber Ways and Geographical Discovery of East Baltics, published in 1956, and The Old Town Maps of Baltic Sea, published in 1959, as well as the book of Mr. Edgars Dunsdorf, War Maps of Courland in 17th and 18th centuries, published in 1984. In its turn, the compilation by Jānis Straukmanis, Courland and Courland People, includes an article Courland depicted in old maps dating between 13th and 19th centuries. First of all, I would like to notice the most ancient maps where the name of Courland was mentioned. Mappa Mundi, the world maps from Middle Ages, published and printed and wrote and drawn by Europeans, dating back to the 13th century. Such a facsimile copy of the map published in Stuttgart in 1898 is stored with the map depository of the National Library of Latvia. This so-called Ebstorf monastery map, according to the opinion of Mr. Leonīds Arbūzovs, is the oldest known map providing information on the territory of Latvia. And on the map we can read names Riga, Duna, Daugava, River Daugava, Courland, meaning Courland or Kurzeme, and Semigallia, Zemgale. Quite a notion about the Baltic Sea and the coastline of Courland are found in the new Ptolemaic maps published in 16th century, and the slide shows the map of Prusland and Livonia published in 1561, and the map depicts the notion of Central Europe geographs of 16th century about the coastline of the Baltic Sea, and set numerous maps of such kind are also stored with the map depository of the Latvian National Library of Latvia, which are also scanned into the map files and are available at the digital library of our National Library of Latvia. Whereas modern time Latvia and Courland lines and borders are more clearly depicted in one of the first printed special maps of Livonia, which is considered to be one of the greatest achievements in mapping of Latvia at that time, which was created by the Dutch astrologist and cartographist Jans Portansis, born in Gent. And the ancient territory of Latvia and Estonia, with the borders consisting before the War of Livonia, dating from 1558 to 1583. The first map edition is found in the Atlantis, published by Abraham Ortelium Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, published in Antwerp in 1573. The depository of the National Library of Latvia also includes a crosscut from the Atlantis published by Artelius, and we can see that on this slide. The cartography historian and a researcher from Latvia, Arbuzov, considered that Portansis could have used materials coming from Livonia itself in order to create his map. Throughout almost a century, this map has served as a basis for creation of the further maps depicting Livonia. The cartographic scenery of Livonia includes a lot of different mistakes and errors. Still, it contains quite a very bountiful set or range of geographical names, 113 settlements and 8 rivers. The map includes also several explanations related to the navigation along the coastline of Livonia, and we have also a sea torch depicted at the Kolka Bay, and Kuldīga is shown here as a large city. The next significant step in the history of mapping of entire Latvia and hence Courland is the map of Livonia, created in 1695 by Flemish cartograph Gerhard Mercator, which is also the founder of modern time cartography. This map was based on the geographical information from other cartographists, for instance Magnus, Portansis and Strubits, although the Duchy of Courland existed more for several decades as depicted in the map of Livonia by Mercator. The territory of modern time Latvia was depicted within the borders of Livonia Confederation. Of course, the map includes also different discrepancies, but still is considered to be the closest depiction of the cartography of Livonia at the end of 16th century. We can really find a very known geographical designations of that time. According to the data of Professor Jānis Strauchmanis, the part of Courland included more than 80 settlements, 3/4 of which were depicted and mapped there for the first time. And that was the first time when Latvian and Estonian settlements were mentioned there as well. Mercator's Atlantis, published in Amsterdam in 1619 by Dutch publisher Jodocus Hondi, also has the map of Livonia depicted in the picture. In fragment of the map we can see an unprecise depiction or drawing of the coastline of Courland, and Kuldīga, Goldingen at that time, was also depicted on the map. In the maps published in Western Europe in 17th and 18th century, further on, referring to the territory of Latvia and including Courland, had no significant changes in geographical scenery. Although Valka, Blaua, Jansson, De Vita maps of Livonia also has depicted a Duchy of Courland named as Courlandia Ducatus and drawn a border between Courland and Semigallia, as well as Kuldīga was drawn as the largest city or town in Courland. Later, there have been different maps published with Courland depicted. Separate maps had that border between Courland and Semigallia, and Kuldīga was shown as the largest town in Courland at that time. In this picture we can see the map published by Gerhard Waltz in 1690. For comparison, we can see two publications of maps which are quite similar in their content, with similar errors, both in the depiction and writing of geographical indications, but in the map history of Latvia, the precise depiction and drawing of the coastline of that territory is of great significance. For European cartographists, that task has been very difficult, and we can see that in the resulted mapping. Such maps appeared for a long time, even up to 18th century. Actually, these publications are really discussed quite in detail in Otto Bank's and Mr. Jānis Strauchmanis. Navigators and sailors also had a great influence in correct mapping of the coastline, as many maps were created by for navigation along the coastline of those territories. At the beginning of the 18th century, the peninsula of Courland became more and more precise, according to those seamen reports, with the contribution of hydrographs as well. On the slide, we can see comparatively precise depiction of the coastline published in Sweden in 1695. Such navigation maps were the basis for Sea Atlas of the Baltic Sea, published in Russian Empire in 1714, книга размерная градусных карт Остзе или Варяжского моря. And these atlanses were supplemented with the profiles of coastline, which were also drawn or reported from the ships. The next slide shows the Sea Atlas of the Baltic Sea, published in 1738, Морской светильник, or Sea Torch. And the lower part of the picture includes the profile of Liepāja and Ventspils as seen from the seawater. And this atlas is also stored with the depository and collection of the National Library of Latvia. In late 17th and early 18th century, separate maps of the Duchy of Courland appeared and was published. This slide depicts the map of the Duchy of Courland, created by the famous French cartographer in 1730, Mr. Nicolas Sanson. And this fragment shows that Kuldīga was mentioned as Goldingen and Kuldīga at the same time. The translation of the map stated the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia, formerly or ex-Livonia. In parallel to the cartographs from Western Europe, we should also mention the contribution made by the Russian cartographs, and entire territory of modern time Latvia first was depicted in the academic publication or issue of 1745 of the Russian Empire. Although the Duchy of Courland was not yet included into the Russian Empire, the map already showed the territory of the duchy, and map stands out also due to the fact that despite all the previous maps, the map showed the way from Prusland to Saldus, Jelgava and Riga, following to St. Petersburg. And that map shows one way from Prusland through Durbe, Saldus, Jelgava and Riga, and finishes in St. Petersburg directly. I would like to mention that the most significant cartographic work dating back to 18th century and refers to the Duchy of Courland is the map of Courland and Semigallia, published by Courland architect Johann Barnickel in 1747, Ducatus Courlantia. The map was published in the famous map publisher from Germany, Johann Baptist Homann, in Nuremberg. This map has very bountiful and decorative names with illustration, and also includes the prayer to our Lord in Latvian. The map depicts and shows many settlements, populated areas, rivers, lakes, mogs, forests, as well as administrative borders of territories. The scale of the map, if compared to the previously mentioned maps, is much more detailed and is 1 to 600,000. The map was also added with legends or designations, and we can see the minimized versions of the legends depicted later in the French and German atlas of 18th century. Unfortunately, in the history of cartography of Latvia, we have quite an unclear situation about the authorship of this map. Similar map was published by Adolf Grot Jr. in 1770. In his issue of the map of the Duchy of Courland, he had mentioned and indicated that the author of the previous map was his father, Adolf Grot Sr., who was a priest in Courland instead of Barnickel as considered in the public. Of course, these both maps were very similar, but the writing of the geographical indications was different, as the map dating back to 1770 had more designations and legends. It is interestingly enough that the map of 1770 was supplemented with illustrations where, apart from and next to the depictions and drawings of buildings and Courland residents and inhabitants, we saw also the Venta, a waterfall with baskets and buckets placed for fishing. To conclude, I would like to remind that despite the very devastating and various historical developments in the territory of modern time Latvia, we can see that the illustrations are quite similar, but there are some differences and peculiarities, and we have really plenty of space to study who actually was the real author of the first map. The minimized maps of the Duchy of Courland are also found in the French and German atlas. For instance, dating back to 1759, the pocket atlas in French language, and the second is Courlandia, published map from Vienna, published in 1791. To conclude, I would like to remind that despite the various turbulating and devastating historical events and developments on the territory of modern time Latvia, the depositories of national memory institutions hold significant depositories and collections of maps and atlas available for the research and study of historical processes and phenomena. The majority of those collections are kept with the historical archives, national archives of Latvia. based on the maps and plans depicting the territory of Latvia. And we have also various hand-painted plans as border plans of manors, parishes, land plots, the measurements taken from the land plots, the road plans, and so on. The maps are also found in the depositories of regional museums and archives, as well as private collections, and are waiting for further research and study. But I could also remind that we have National Digital Library at the website dom.lndb.lv, where a huge part of the maps available in the depository of the National Library of Latvia have been scanned and is available in digital format in the National Archives and Depository of the Latvian National Library of Latvia. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much to the speaker. Do we have any questions from the audience? Welcome. So the topic was so interesting and very interesting. Don't we have any questions? Perhaps our participants abroad could have questions. First of all, I have the first question. You mentioned published and printed maps, but does the depository of the National Library of Latvia include handwritten and hand-painted maps? Honestly speaking, I cannot answer very precisely because of the depository is held with the department or collection of handwritings. I was looking for Courland. Among the collection of the ancient plans of Kuldīga, you also saw 1797 included in several books, and I found that in the library myself, but I didn't find any map or plan dating earlier. Of course, there might be some plan of manor drawn by hand, but I really am studying and researching printed maps. Our depository or collection has been divided into printed and handwritten or hand-drawn. But of course, we must search. This is not my topic in particular. I have different direction of my research, and I didn't have enough time to study handwritten as well. And the second question is about authorship of Barnacle and Grot. In the war maps of Courland, did not the author of those mention the author of the previous maps? Those both maps are called jointly Barnacle and Grot map. I know that Mr. Jānis Strohmanis also doubted slightly the authorship of Barnacle, but of course we can and could study. Perhaps in Nuremberg there was the publisher, as commercial publishers had a lot of prints, and that was also printed and published by the heirs of Grot. So Grot Jr. has written that his father had traveled around Courland, and the archives also hold the diary or travel diary of Grot Senior. I have taken a look at that, and notes were very complicated, and it was really hard to make something out of that. But I still presume that Grot Senior had actually traveled. But Barnacle was the architect and constructor. I think that Mr. Strohmanis had also considered that Grot Senior was deceased already when the first map was published for 2 decades already. I also searched the periodicals. In ancient periodicals had a note or remark that yes, actually there had been a priest going around by cart with a tool and he had measured the distances. And discussing the second map, that is the most precise map because Groth Jr. had corrected the first map and supplemented with different illustrations. And the most important peculiarity is the borders of Piltene parish. And the second map really depicted the Piltene parish consisting of 3 parts, as it actually had been. These maps are comparable to the territory of Latvia with the maps of Vidzeme of that time. Scales were similar, of course not very precise as well, but Courland or Vidzeme could have been depicted, but it's really hard to imagine the entire picture, whole picture of Courland, Semigallia and Vidzeme. Another question is, what about the maps published in Lithuania and Poland at the depository of the National Library of Latvia? Yes, we have, but as I've mentioned in the very beginning of my presentation, we have, but I have not studied them and included them. Of course, that is a really widespread field for research. And I mentioned that it is really an opportunity for researchers to use what we have at our depository of the National Library of Latvia regarding the old and ancient maps. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you so much once again. If we have no further questions, and we can switch over to the next speaker.
Diemžēl nākamais
Unfortunately, next speaker, Margarita Barzdevich, we will not have due to her business, and so we skip that one and we start with connections overseas, relations during the reign of Jacob Kettler, Duke of Courland and Semigallia with the Dutch Republic. And we will have Laura Plezier, MA, Leiden University, the Netherlands, PhD student, art and architectural historian.
Good morning. First of all, I want to thank the organization for the invitation. My name is Laura Plezier from Leiden University in the Netherlands, and now I'm still sitting in my home in The Hague. In 1648, the Peace of Münster ended the war between the Dutch Republic and Spain, and the Republic was internationally recognized. Trade, shipping, and wealth flourished as never before. The Republic saw itself as the center of the world and has contacts with many countries. These contacts were therefore also with the Duchy of Courland. My question for this lecture is simple. What can we still find in Dutch archives about the contacts between the Republic and Courland in the 17th century? I focus on the period of Jacob Kettler's duchy from 1642 until his death in 1682, because it is precisely he who pursued mercantilistic politics as the Dutch did. I distinguish two forms of contacts. First, trade and diplomatic relations between Courland and the Republic, and second, the colonial relationship between Courland and the Republic around the Caribbean island of Tobago. So first, trade and diplomatic relations. Jacob Kettler has traveled in the period 1634 and 1637 and stayed in Amsterdam. So I hope to find information in the archives about his stay there. He probably visited shipyards because he invited Dutch shipbuilders to build his large fleet in Courland. But in the archives we can nothing found about this time period. What we do found are maps, a lot of maps. For example, I found a nautical map, a so-called pass map with lines. I can show you that. Here, oh, no, sorry, it's the wrong map. Here it is. A so-called pass map with lines drawn by compass, and the map is meant to navigate. The map is part of a popular book in the Netherlands, The New Great Shining Sea Torch, first part. It was published in Amsterdam in 1681 by Johannes van Keulen, and he was a publisher and bookseller who had received permission from the States of the Republic to publish 6 sea atlases. The atlases contain sea maps, coastal profiles and travel stories of seafarers. The maps were made by cartographer Klaas Voogd and the illustrations by the famous etcher Jan Luyken. Illustrations like you can see here, a man and women. In the first part of the Sea Torch, which appears in 1681 and deals with North and East European waters, we find the map of Courland. And when we zoom in the map, we can see here the coastline, the word Courland, and a stake with different harbor entrances. So the map is really intended for maritime navigation. When I zoom in again, we see the harbor of Riga. It was a trade destination for the Dutch, and they had a good knowledge of the coastline and the port. What we also find in the archives are the names of diplomats who have been active in the Republic on behalf of Courland in the field of trade and political relations. These are Dutch men who worked in the Republic on behalf of the Duke. They are often members of good families. I can show you here all the names I found in the archives. So Willem de Groot, he was a famous lawyer, also working for our the family of our current king, the House of Orange. Joachim de Wigfort, he was also working for the French king. De Groot, Gas, Van Tonnet. It are all famous Dutch family names. The position of the diplomat has several names: counselor, minister, resident, and nowadays it is not possible to find out what this meant. How the Duke chose these people and asked them to fulfill a task for him is unknown. The archives of Holland's top official, the Grand Pensionary of the province of Holland, the most important region in the Republic, contain files on Courland. And yesterday I was lucky to go to the National Archives and to see those files. Due to the Corona crisis, it was not possible to visit the archives earlier. And I found very interesting things in files, in letters about the relationship, the political relationship between the States General of the Republic and the Duke of Courland, especially around the ownership of the island of Tobago. So I will put that in my paper. The Royal Library in the Netherlands holds a letter from the Secretary of the Family of Orange, Constantijn Huygens, you can see him here, to Johannes Oborski Columna, dated January 18, 1642. Since the 19th century, Oborski Columna has been referred to as the envoy of Latvia or Courland in our archives and literature. The letter is poorly readable, you can see it a little bit here in my PowerPoint, in a difficult form of Neo-Latin and was therefore never translated. Because of my research for this Congress, we have looked closely at it with several people. It turns out that Oborski Columna was not a citizen of Latvia or Courland, but a Pole who held powerful positions in the cities of Lviv and Warsaw. Perhaps he also performed for Courland, we don't know. In the letter, Huygens addresses Oborski's question how he, Huygens, can be honored by Oborski. Oborski's son is also discussed. Huygens will support him. The letter has many questions for us. Maybe there are people here at the Congress who can help us with this letter and with the relationship of Oborski Columna with the Dutch Republic. I now move on to the second form of contact between the Duchy and the Republic, the colony of Tobago. As you know, the Republic and the Duchy have shared land ownership on the Caribbean islands of Tobago. It was there that the paths of our countries literally crossed. In 1628, Dutch settlers from the southern province of Zeeland established the first European settlement in Tobago, a colony they called Nieuw Walcheren, like the island Walcheren in Zeeland. They also built a fort, New Flushing, named after their main town, Flushing. The settlement was abandoned in 1630 after attacks by the Spanish, but was re-established in 1633. This new colony was destroyed by the Spanish from the island of Trinidad. In 1638, Jacob, Duke of Courland, settled on the northern part of the island a colony and called it Great Courland Bay. And he cultivated the island. It fits in his ideas about colonialism. But two Dutch brothers, Cornelis and Adrian Lempsins, were members of the wealthy merchant Lempsins family in Flushing. The brothers were ship owners, and Cornelis was Major of Flushing and Director of the West Indian Company. Adrian was Director of the East Indian Company. In 1655, the West Indian Company allowed the Lempsins brothers to find a new colony on the island of Tobago. 600 Dutch migrants of Zeeland settled on the south coast of Tobago and founded a colony there, which they called again Nieuw Walcheren. They also built the Lemsinsburg settlement, contemporarily the town of Scarborough. 3 more forts were built near the town. And under the leadership of Cornelis, the island of Tobago was transformed into a plantation area where around 7,000 slaves worked to grow sugar and cacao. And they also worked in 2 rum distilleries. When in 1658, the Duke of Courland was taken prisoner by Charles Gustavus of Sweden, the Dutch attacked the settlers of Courland on the northern part of the island. And yesterday in the archives, I found a letter in which was written how the Dutch attacked the people of Courland. And it was not a nice action of the Dutch, but I will put it in my paper too. In 1662, Cornelis Lampsins obtained from King Louis XIV of France the title Baron of Tobacco and sent out Hubert de Bevere as governor, who built fortifications. In that period, the colony flourished. You can see here a certificate of the King of France. It is in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and they obtained the proclamation of King Louis to Cornelis Lampsins. As a result, the island was definitely in the hands of the Republic, with the consent of France. The draftsman, Johannes Vingboons, made drawings and maps of all kinds of cities, bays and harbors in the world where the West Indian and East Indian companies send their ships or have settlements. The drawings, which he based on maps and stories of others, helped the crew to recognize land from the sea. The drawings were copied and given to captains and helmsmen, and there are still 2 of such Vingboon drawings of tobacco in our archives. Here you can see one of them. So it's the real navigation map. You can see the red island of Trinidad, and there's a small island above it with, and that's Tobago. But there's also a view made in watercolor. And this is a bay on Tobago. And the typical Dutch fort, you can see it on the left side of the drawing, the typical Dutch fort of New Flushings. We can also see the tobacco plantations on the drawing. I think it's a beautiful thing. It's in our National Archive. During the Second English War, the English plundered the island to such an extent that it was no longer prosperous. On March the 3rd in 1677, the French attacked during the First Battle of Tobago the town of Lemsinsburg and all the Dutch ships. The Dutch commanding officer, Jacob Binkes, managed to bring a strategic defeat to the French with great losses. And there's a beautiful print in the archive of our National Army Museum in the middle of the Netherlands. It is a print of the event made for a Dutch newspaper, the Dutch Mercury, and we see the Bay of New Flushing, the forts in the middle of the print, and a map of the island. When we zoom in this particular map, we see the Bay of Courland, in Dutch Koordse Baai, still on the map with an anchorage. An entirely different witness of this event, the battle with the French, is a drawing made by a seafarer from the Radcliffe Bay on Tobago. I'm going to talk further, but my PowerPoint presentation is still hanging. So it is a witness, it is a drawing from one of the seafarers, and we do not see an exact presentation of the bay, no lines on which to navigate, and no well-documented coasts, but the drawing is not artistic, it is a good narrative and witness of the fighting. When we zoom in, we see the French who hide and firing bullets at the Dutch. And that's very funny to see. On December 6, during the Second Battle of Tobago, the Dutch are again attacked by the French, and then things go wrong for good. Commander Binkes is killed, and with the Peace of Nijmegen in 1678, came definitely an end to New Walcheren, and the whole of Tobago became French territory. But in our national archives, in the archives of the States General, here in The Hague, the legacy of the Lampsins brothers would be a subject of debate for years to come. There are a lot of letters, letters with Courland, but also with the King of England, about the ownership of the island. The Duke of Courland again wants to get his island back. He wants to buy it to the King of England, and the Dutch, yeah, they want to have it too. So it's very interesting material in our national archives. Here you can see the drawing of the seafarer, of the fight. Oh. No, I'm going to talk further. The dramatic event with the French was captured by the well-known... Yeah, I'm going back. This is the drawing of the seafarer. And when we zoom in, you can see here the Dutch, here the French, and they are firing a bullet to the Dutch. It's very funny to see. Yes? Yeah. Is it? Yeah, you can see it. Ah, okay. Yes, I do. But the dramatic event with the French was captured by the well-known printmaker, writer and artist Romein de Hooge. Share. Can you see it? Yeah. And you want to see again the bullets of the French? Here. Here are the French, and they are firing bullets to the Dutch. This one is made by Romein de Hooge, very famous Dutch printmaker, and he seems to have used the prints published in the newspaper. I show it earlier to you, because the bay is the same and the forts are the same and the map of Tobago is the same. It is interesting to see how Europeans fight each other in tropical forests. The drama depicted in this print shows brutal Frenchmen, and that is exactly what Romein de Hooge intended. He was a fierce opponent of the French king and often made cartoons about the French king. So it's also a political print we see here. If we look at the map stake in that print, we see once again the reference to Courland Bay, so the former area of Courland. You can see it at the blue arrow. There's written in Dutch the Bay of Courland, Koerdse Baai. In the aforementioned book, The Great Shining Sea Torch, from the 80s, in part 4, there's also a navigation sea map of the area near Trinidad and Tobago. And we see Tobago in a stake. So you can see in the right upper corner the stake of Tobago. We see all the cliffs. Here is Tobago. All the cliffs, anchorages and the geographical names, which are all written in Dutch. So Redcliffe Bay, Flemish Bay, all in Dutch written. but the name Courland Bay or Koertse Bay is no longer to be found. At that moment, so in the 80s, the traces of the people of Courland on Tobago have been vanished. That is what the maps tell to us. So I can conclude that detailed sea maps related to Courland and Tobago can be found in the Dutch archives. These maps make it possible to sail the coast well and therefore indicate intensive navigation, contacts and trade. As far as trade and political relations are concerned, traces can be found in our archives, but we cannot interpret everything equally well at this moment. Thank you very much.
Liels paldies referentei.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions to our lecturer? I have a question. Do you plan to come to Latvia after this COVID problem and to work with sources which can be found in Latvian archives?
Where I can see that? Oh, I would like to go to Latvia, of course. I want to see the city of Riga. But unfortunately, because of the coronavirus, I'm not able to come. So when the coronavirus is tackled, I want to go to Latvia.
I can add that in Latvian State Archives we do have materials on relationship between the Duke of Courland and the Netherlands, and much of it can be found also in the Dutch language, so it would be nice to have some Dutch researchers to come here and to examine this, because our archive materials have quite a lot of names mentioned who have worked on behalf of Duke in the Netherlands, and also ship owners and traders and merchants. Artisans have been there, so we have many names to mention, so information is very vast.
So it is it. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the nice connection.
Vēl kādi jautājumi?
Any other questions to the speaker? We have opportunity. So if you have a question, please approach the mic and that will be chatted to the participants. Is there any comment from the speaker or information on the persons from colonized lands and local population who could have reached the Duchy of Courland and continued to live here later on? Thank you. While the question is chatted. It seems that I could answer the question as well. So while Laura receives the question, I would like to share the technical information. The most Almuta Buesa had a presentation provided in the April time agenda. And therefore, I would like to announce that those two studies or researches will be available in the compilation of articles or theses published after the conference, and the handouts you received, the theses are included there as well. Is Laura ready to answer?
Who were brought to the Duchy of Courland. I know there were a lot of slaves, and I don't know about their lives. But yesterday I found a letter in which was written that the people of Courland living on Semigallia were sent by the Dutch by ships to Italy and Portugal and lived there after the colony was not in the hands of the Duke. So the Dutch sent them to Portugal and Italy. That's the only thing I know.
Vai Mārītei vēl ir kādi komentāri?
Miss Marita could have comment as well. This is a topic I would like to share for an entire day, but to answer the question, have there been people from Tobago come to the Duchy of Courland? A Tobago boy was mentioned in the accounts of the Duke of Courland, who had died quite young, and his funeral was mentioned in the accounts. Also, we have data on a young person who was trained to be the drummer and lived longer, up to adult, and actually these are some have been, but quite a small number of them. So that would be the short answer on my behalf. Speaking about slave trade, which is a very painful question to many researchers, we must understand that it was quite a common thing, and moral values were considered or perceived only by 1 person per million. Of course, there were some debates about moral part of the issue, but at that time, it was quite a common thing and phenomena for answering the household needs of the dukedom of Duchy. We do not have data that the Duke of Courland could have brought some personal slaves. We know that Duke Jacob offered Spain, Kingdom of Spain, to deliver or take and buy slaves from Tobago and bring them to Americas. To say that Duke Jacob had been participating in the mass trade of slaves, we cannot do so. And throughout his rule, the colonies actually existed in a very short period of time, from 1654 to 69, when Dutch took it over, when Duke Jacob fought and combated quite a lot to regain the right on the island, and the right to on island was quite euphemic, because all the negotiations took place with the English and Dutch conquering the island, considering to negotiate with the King of France, although French had no saying in that, as they had conquered the Dutch part of the island for a short while. And the speaker mentioned that the traits of Courland people disappeared in the maps. There are several maps stored in Germany, in Berlin, and in our archives, dating back to late 17th century, with Courland Bay, Courland River, and several forts, which can be found also in a modern map of Tobago, as influence of Courland in Tobago was much more than Dutch ones, because Dutch stayed there longer, and these traits and geographical indications or designations disappear slightly as well. All those names are found from the Duchy of Courland to nowadays. The second colony of Duke Jacob was established in late 70s of the 17th century. There are no precise data and dates on the period of existence of the second colony, for presumably for 10 to 15 years. And to discuss that Tobago was the colony of Tobago in a wider scale, we cannot do so. And when speaking about Dutch and Courland claims on the island, we can see that Dutch largely were located in southern part, and Courland was located northwards, and the cliffs or the mountain range actually was crossing the island, but that European debate on the rights on the island and governance of the island involved entire Tobago, as the island was not divided into our part, your part, and our right and claim. So Courland was never existed and located in the south part of the island. Wherefore, all that historical information should be perceived quite reserved. In 60s and 70s or 17th century, there was a large-scale debate, and Duke Jacob was also fighting quite rightly about his right, as we can refer it to the agreement of Duke Jacob with the King of England, replacing or switching and transferring, trading the territories of Duke Jacob in Gambia to island of Tobago. This is the topic still discussed throughout nowadays, and we have research also in England, in the Netherlands, up to date. And this is the topic quite very acute to many researchers and interested parties. Thank you so much for your comment. Do we have any questions to Miss Marita? Yes, we have. Could you please comment the artwork Courland, people going to Tobago? Does that drawing or map or painting, should we perceive it as an artwork and legend, or some fragment of truth in that as well? My personal opinion is that it is quite a fairy tale, a dream. The first expeditions navigating to Tobago, they were recruited mainly in the Netherlands and Germany, and consisted of local German, Baltic Germans, and Duke Jacob didn't wish to bring Latvian peasants and farmers to Tobago. Another thing is that he had planned to bring Latvian farmers and peasants to Gambia, and we can find it out from the report of one of the agents of the Duke Jacob to Brandenburg Bürgermeister, when in 1786 the Duke Jacob was captured. Relatives were questioned about the ships of Duke Jacob and economic activities, on one hand to protect, on other hand to take them over for benefit and profit. And so the data were collected and studied and inquired from Danzig, Königsberg, and one of the reports stated that Duke Jacob had planned to send Latvian farmers to Gambia to show locals niggers, what was also a common name and word in that time to show how farmers should actually work, because Gambians were refusing so local foreigners living in Gambia refused to cultivate the land, and Gambians were slaved, so Latvians were not sent during the rule of Duke Jacob and the next ruler, who also tried to maintain the colony. There have been one has reported that non-German Bibles were sent to Tobago, and we can presume that there were some Latvians in the expeditions to Tobago who needed Bibles in Latvian. We have had also from local reports studied that Latvian farmers were completely afraid and freaking out of the idea that we could have been sent to Tobago, and there were rumors and talks that they could have been beaten here on the spot instead of being sent somewhere overseas. Do we have any questions to Marīte? Thank you so much. If not, we would like to thank Ms. Marīte Jakovleva for moderating our session. We would like to extend our gratitude to our remote participants. We will have a lunch break, and we meet 10 minutes to 2 back here in the hall. Thank you so much.